So far we have seen that in order to define data flow analysis, we define properties of execution paths. In order to formulate the analysis, we define data flow equations, which are linear simultaneous equations. And in order to perform the analysis, we solve the data flow equations for a given program flow graph. And the solution of these data flow equations gives us the result of our analysis. Now we want to go a little deeper into what is the meaning of solving these equations for a given program flow graph. We just seen intuitively that we begin with a conservative value which is then refined further. We want to spend a bit of time on this particular concept. We want to digress a little into iterative solution of linear simultaneous equations. So all of you have studied the solution of linear simultaneous equations. Simultaneous equations represented in the form of a product of a matrix of coefficients A with the vector of unknowns x, and we write it as A multiplied by x is equal to B, and in order to get the values of the unknowns, the values of the variables in the vector x, we start with approximate values and compute new values repeatedly from the old values. There are two classical methods, and when I say classical, they are really old. So one is a Gauss-Seidel method, which is attributed to Gauss and is said to be invented in 1823 and 1826. And Seidel seems to have simultaneously discovered the same method in 1874. And there is another method called Jacobi method, which is attributed to Jacobi in 80 and is supposed to have been invented in 1845. So we want to look at these two methods and want to understand how we use these methods in data flow analysis. Both these methods may have been studied by you in your engineering courses when you did numerical analysis. So we will take an example, a numerical example with a number which is easier to illustrate. So we want to see how we solve this equation. So we have this equation, a rather simplistic equation in w, x, y and z, and we're saying 4w equal to x plus y plus 32. Similarly, 4x is equal to the other two variables plus 32. 4y is equal to z plus w plus 32, 4z is equal to w plus x plus 32. And the solution is all these variables should have value 16. That is the expected solution. Okay. In order to solve this equation of system of linear simultaneous equations, we rewrite the equations to define w, x, y, z. All we have to do is to define all the quantities by 4, because we have a factor 4 appearing on the left hand side. So we have these equations written down in this form, and now we'll use this notation. We'll assume some initial value which we call w0, x0, y0 and z0, and then we have a recurrence. We compute wi from wi minus 1, xi from the previous values, yi from the previous values. So wi refers to the value computed in the ith step, ith iteration. We're trying to iteratively solve the system of simultaneous equations. So when we use the subscript I, it means that we are computing these values in the ith iteration. And within some margin of errors, because we are dealing with real numbers, we may not get the exact value. So we need to define the margin of errors. So here, let's assume that we begin with our initial assumption that all values are 24. We know that this is not the solution. The solution is 16, and we need to reach close to 16, and we define our error margin as when wi plus 1 minus wi is less than 0.35, then we say we do not want to compute the values further. We have got the values that we want. Similarly, for each of these we have chosen a value 0.35. There is nothing magical about 0.35. The only reason I have chosen 0.35, it's a convenient value which allows me to fit the number of iterations in one slide. In practice, you may want to go to 0.01 or whatever. So for convenience, we assume this as the margin of error. So starting with W0, X0 and Y0, now we want to compute in iteration 1 W1, Y1, W1, X1, Y1 and Z1. And it's easy to see that we want to divide all these numbers by 4 and add up this 8 to it. So we have 6 plus 6 plus 8, 20. We have 6 plus 6 plus 8 at 20, 6 plus 6 plus 8 is 20, 6 plus 6 plus 8 is 20. Here we are discussing the Gauss-Seidel method. So what we are doing is, in order to compute W1, we are picking up all values from W0. In general, when we compute Wi, we will pick up all values from, in general we pick up values in iteration I, we will pick up the values computed in iteration I minus 1. So now we compute values in iteration 2, and here we, for computing the values with subscript 2, we use the values, the values computed in iteration 1, which are the values with subscript 1. So now all these values are 20. We divide 20 by 4 and we get 5 plus 5 plus 8, which is 18, and we get the number 18 for all these 4 values. In the third iteration, we are going to use the values computed in the second iteration. So we will divide 18 by 4 and we get 17. Note that this is still this is still not close to our error margin. This does not satisfy that, so we need to iterate until we satisfy this particular condition. In the iteration 4, we pick up the values which are 17, divide them by 4 and compute these values. So this becomes, now the result becomes 16.5. Observe that progressively we are reaching closer to the answer, but the difference of the values between iteration 3 and iteration 4 is still 0.5, which is larger than 0.35. So therefore we say we need to iterate once again. In order to iterate once again, we pick up the value 16.5 divided by 4, and now we get 4.125 plus 8, now we get 16.25. And now when we compare these values in iteration 4 and iteration 5, their difference is 0.25, which is smaller than the error margin. So we say that our analysis can now terminate, because now we have got the final values. When we perform this method using sets, we will want the sets to be identical, because there is no question of error margin between the sets. But the point here that I want to illustrate is an important observation, that when we compute values in iteration I, we use values in iteration I minus 1, which is perhaps not the best thing to do. And the reason is, observe that here the value of y depends on the value of w, and we would have computed a new value of w in iteration I. So instead of computing computing the value of yi from w I minus 1, it is also possible to reuse the value of w in the same iteration. That brings us to the Jacobi's method. The idea is that we use values from the current iteration whenever possible. So we solve exactly the same set of equations with the same initial value and the same error margin, and then we see that in iteration 1 we start getting different values. Observe what we have done. So for W1, because we want x and y and there is no initial value of x and y, we use x0 and y0, and therefore we get W1 and x1 as 20. However, for y1 we need the value of w, and this w1 has been computed in this iteration. So we use the value from the current iteration of y, which is 5 here, so we get 19. Similarly for z, we need to use values of w and x, and w1 and x1 have been computed as 20, so we use 5 plus 5 and plus 8, we get 18. Note that in the Gauss-Seidel method we got all these values as 20, whereas here we got the first two values at 20, and last y1 is 19 and z1 is 18. This suggests that we might be able to converge faster on the solution than we would do if we were to use Gauss-Seidel method, because we are using the latest values wherever it is possible to do so. Now in the next iteration we get further values like this, and observe that here we already come to close to value 16 here in iteration 2. In iteration 3 we get these values, and in iteration 4 we get these values, and now that meets our error margin. So this difference is within the error margins, so we converge here. Observe here that the values are not identical in this situation. That's because we are using Jacobi method. In the Gauss-Seidel method all the values were equal, but we will still treat them as equal because the difference between them still is within the error margin. So all of them are equal to each other for all practical purposes. Why did we look at these two methods? We looked at these two methods because the method that we use in performing data flow analysis, the method that we have used in the earlier part of the lecture for performing live variables analysis, is called a round robin iteration. Round robin because it visits the nodes in a fixed order, and that's called a round robin order. Round robin because it goes over the nodes in a circular fashion in a fixed order, but the computation is performed using the Jacobi's method, which means that we use the values from the current iteration wherever possible. And the unknowns in this case are data flow variables in I and out I, and the domain of values is not numbers, it is sets. So our algorithm is we perform computation of fixed order in a fixed order, and this fixed order could be either forward or technically reverse post order traversal over the control flow graph, or a backward order, or technically a post order traversal over the control flow graph. For live variables analysis we use the post order traversal over the control flow graph. In a post order traversal we visit a node only after visiting all its successors. In a reverse post order we visit a node only after visiting all its predecessors. Of course, in this case the predecessors and successors along the back edge could not be visited, they are ignored. We will talk in more details about these post orders, how they are defined, how they are identified, and what happens to back edges, etc. when we talk about the complexity of data flow analysis in module 2 of this course. So here is another tutorial problem for liveness analysis, and I would like you to draw the control flow graph and perform liveness analysis over the control flow graph. So a certain C function has been given. If this had been a lecture in a classroom, I would have paused here for 15 minutes and allowed you to construct a control flow graph, but this is a pre-recorded lecture, so I have to proceed, and you already have the answer here, but I suggest that you try to construct this on your own and try to see that your answer matches the control flow graph that I have given. Similarly, the solution of tutorial problem is available here. I will not go over each step, but I will leave it here. One difference here is in showing the solution we are only showing changes in iteration 2. In principle, we need one more iteration called iteration 3 in order to identify, in order to detect that we have indeed converged and there is no further change. But in our computation, in the slides, we do not show that. So here is the same control flow graph on which I hope by now you have performed the live variables analysis and have got the data flow values as in the previous table. In this case, we want to interpret the result. We want to understand the result of live variables analysis and the process of live variables analysis. So here are some questions. And the first question is A live at the exit of node 5 at the end of iteration 1? So we're talking about here, is A live at this program point at the end of iteration 1? The answer is that A is not live at the end of iteration 1, because in order for A to be live at the end of iteration 1, it will need the value from node 2. But when we visit node 5, node 2 has not been visited. We have only visited node 6. So the answer to this is no. We have used post order traversal, and A is not live at the end of iteration 1. Is A live at the exit of node 5 at the end of iteration 2? So we are once again asking a question. When we iterate over this graph for the second time, do we get A as live here? The answer is yes, because in the first iteration, because A is live here, it becomes live at the exit of 2 and it becomes live at the entry of 2. This happens in the very first iteration. So therefore, in the second iteration, when we compute out of 5, we will take the value from in of 2, which already includes A, and therefore variable A is live at the exit of node 5 in iteration 2. The next question says, show an execution path along which A is live at the exit of node 5. So when we talk about execution paths, we need to talk about paths starting from 1. So the execution path of interest here is we go from 1, 2, 3, and either 4 or directly to the 5, and from 5 we go to 2, and from 2 we go to 6. So this is the execution path. The backward part of this execution path is because A is live here, therefore it is live here, therefore it is live here. So we have to pick up any execution path that has the suffix 5 to 6, and that execution path will be a valid answer for this part of the question. The next question is, show an execution path along which variable A is live at the exit of node 3. So we are asking whether A is live at node 3, and the answer is yes, because A is used here. And the execution path along which A is live at the exit of node 3, any execution path that has edge from 3 to 5 is a valid execution path. So this is an example. We go from 1, 2, 3, 5, 2. The next question asks, show an execution path along which A is not live. The previous questions asked A is live. This says A is not live at the exit of node 3. Recall that for liveness analysis, we say a variable is live at a program point if it is used along some path, which means that it may be live along some path, but it may not be live along some other path. The answer to this is easy. From 3, in any execution path, when we go to 4, the value of A is redefined. So at the exit of 3, A is live because it is used in 5 because of this control flow path. But when we talk about this execution path or this control flow path, A is not live. So these are the answers to these questions. Let's move on to the next tutorial problem, which is again, now instead of giving a C program and asking you to write a control flow graph, I would like you to take a control flow graph and write a C program. The only condition is that you're not supposed to be using goto or a break statement in the C program, and this makes it very interesting. But again, because it's a pre-recorded lecture, we already have the control flow graph. I already have the program here. I suggest you please try to do it independently. Now we have the solution of liveness analysis. Again, I will not go over each and every step. Instead, let us look at some interesting questions. here on this control flow graph, which are derived from the results that we got in the table in the previous slide. So the first question is, why is Z live at the exit of N5? Why is Z live at the exit of N5? Z is killed here, Z is killed here. So there should be a path from 5 that uses Z before being defined, and the answer is easy. We have this path from N5 going back to N3, and within N3 there is a use of Z, and that answers the question. Now there is a question, why is Z not live at the entry of N5? So we ask this question at the exit of N5, and in the result we find that Z is not live at the entry of N5. And the reason for that is that Z is redefined here. What that means is, whatever value of Z is coming from this path or this path, that value is really not required in the rest of the execution of the program, because a new value is being put in Z. This value, whatever value it may be contained, this is overwritten, this is replaced by this particular assignment, and therefore Z is not live at the entry of N5, although it is live at the exit of N5. The next question is, why is X live at the exit of N3? And there is more detail to this question. At the exit of N3, in spite of being killed at N4. So here X is being killed in N4, but our result says X is live here. And the answer to that question is because we have a path from N3, N5, N6 that uses X, and therefore X is live at the exit of N3, in spite of the fact that it is killed in this path, but it is live because of this particular path. I will leave the rest of the questions to you. Identify the instance of dead code elimination. The answer here is Z is equal to X in N6, and it's easy to imagine that nothing is live at the exit of N6, therefore this assignment is dead. Would the first round of dead code elimination cause liveness information to change? And the answer is yes, because now X will not be live. X was live here because of the use in N6, but we have got rid of this particular assignment, therefore X will not be live here. Would the second round of liveness analysis lead to further dead code elimination? The answer to that question is yes, because if this X is not being used, then this particular assignment to X is of no use. We can get rid of this particular assignment.